everybody. Welcome back to this week's podcast here at We Eat Fish Eat. We have got some exciting guests in the studio today. We're going to be talking about the Green Bay walleye fishery, and we got the one and only Hunter Flanders. Hunter, how you doing today?
Yes, I'm doing good. I'm very excited about this podcast. We got some special guests in here today, and our last podcast, I would say mixed reviews, overall good, but it definitely brought the heat.
Right, it definitely brought the heat. Well, that's just anytime you got the heat, it shows that people have an interest, right? Some people have an interest of thinking positive, some negative, right? And that's the great part about like a podcast, or the great part about living in this country is that, you know what, you get to have your opinion, right?
Right. And
good or bad, right?
Right. And so Adam gave you a call after that podcast because he was like, "Hey man, what happened? We're getting some calls." And thank you guys for listening and chiming in, and your comments, positive or negative. That's why we do the podcast. That's why we are certainly talking about stuff like this. And so we're like, let's bring him in.
Adam, who wants to start? You or Jason? Let's tell everybody who you are.
I'm Adam Nickel. I'm the fish team supervisor for the Peshtigo work unit. So that covers Green Bay, Peshtigo, and Florence. So kind of northeastern part of the state.
Yep.
And then been there for about 2 years now. And before then, I was fisheries biologist for 8-9 years in Oshkosh and sometime in Otoma. So our days go back to then.
Yeah. Well, you did a fantastic job on the Winnebago fishery. There's no doubt about that. I mean, personally, I think that 3-fish limit was definitely the best thing that's ever happened to the system, right? It's just, it's an amazing body of water. I mean, I was out yesterday with some clients, and you know, we caught probably 40 walleyes and a lot of young fish. Like, we caught a ton of walleyes. I don't know where they came from. The last 3 weeks, there are a lot of 11 to 12 inchers, like oodles of them. And when I'm looking on the live scope, a lot of pods of 30, 40 of these fish together. So yeah, that very awesome job. And I'm interested in seeing what you have to say today. And Jason, go ahead.
I'm Jason Breeggemann. I'm the fish biologist with the DNR based out of the Green Bay office, and I manage all waters in Brown County as well as inland waters in Manitowoc County. So I don't do any management with the Great Lakes trout and salmon in Lake Michigan. That's all handled by our northern Lake Michigan fish team. And I also manage the walleye and muskie fisheries on the Bay of Green Bay. And so before I've been in this position for a little over 3 years now. I started in 2022. Before that, I was a biologist with the DNR in Shawano for about 5 years, so just down the road. And before that, I worked for the Fish and Wildlife Service and took the grad school route. So
holy cow.
Happy to be here. I'm excited.
We're excited to have you.
Walleye management, and we'll build on some of the stuff. Hopefully the viewers remember when your team was out. It would have been spring of 2024, and you did a little segment on our walleye tagging study that we started in 2024. So hopefully we'll touch on that today, what some of the results are showing. So.
That's awesome. Hey, Adam, I got to ask you, and I've been hearing rumors. What are you laughing about? I got to ask you this. I've been hearing this rumor, right? I've been hearing this rumor that they're actually going to take the dam out of the Peshtigo. Is that true or not true?
It's there is some ownership debate there on if they're going to continue ownership. So a lot of it is nothing set in stone or anything like that. We haven't even really started having a lot of discussion. But if that does happen, where there's a change in ownership or, you know, selling or anything like that, obviously we'd be at the table discussing, you know, if that's an option, and you know, obviously getting all the stakeholders involved with that too. So
okay,
it's kind of been brewing more in the rumor mill, I think. Than
it's funny how them rumors going, because I know somebody that has a fly shop in Green Bay. I'm not going to name any names, but they've been telling somebody that dam is going to come out of there in 2 years, 100%.
That'd be news to me, but you know,
that's what I'm saying about rumors, right?
It's always how they fly.
Always rumors about something. So my big thing is that, you know, I was lucky enough to fish the Green Bay fishery for walleyes, you know, 25, 30 years ago, even a little bit more. And back then there wasn't the amount of pressure there is now. And the fish that I saw back there and then compares to what I see now is a little bit concerning to me. So I want to really kind of talk about this. Did you take over Rod Lang's position? or was he gone a long time ago?
Rod was gone before I got there. I believe Rod was a technician. Steve Hogler was
Okay.
biologist
Yeah.
in the Green Bay office before me. And he was in that position for 10 or so years. And before that, he worked out of the Michigan office doing a lot of work with steelhead and Great Lakes salmon. But Steve Hogler was a biologist.
Okay. So what really initially got that Green Bay fishery going? What was the initial spark on that? Because I remember as a little kid going up to the Pier Dam with my dad in the spring and catching walleyes. And it was a really good walleye fishery then. They didn't taste very good out of that river back then. But so what got it going? What made Green Bay a walleye factory?
Well, we can even go back a little farther, go back 100 or so years, and walleyes were actually nearly extirpated from the Bay of Green Bay due to overfishing, habitat loss, declines in water quality, significant amounts of sediment covering the land or covering up spawning reefs.
Okay.
That the only known spawning location in Wisconsin waters up until the 70s was the Menominee River, and so in the 70s and early 1980s, the DNR partnered with groups like Walleyes for Tomorrow and other organizations to work on a really big restoration effort. And during that time, they stocked millions and millions. It's like, I don't have the exact numbers, but something like 73 million fry and 5 to 10 million fingerling walleyes, and also did some significant habitat restoration projects, some department-led, others led by environmental groups like Walleyes for Tomorrow. They put in a big walleye spawning reef on the lower east shore of Green Bay, right off of Joliet Park. And that stocking efforts to establish an adult population, along with some restored habitat, really is what led to the walleye boom, or the resurgence of walleyes in the Green Bay fishery. So, and since the 80s, it's largely been sustained through natural reproduction. There had been some small remnant stockings up in the Sturgeon Bay area, but it's largely been driven by really good natural reproduction through time.
Okay. So what's your opinion now? I mean, obviously you've got a lot of graphs that you brought in, which are very interesting. What's your opinion now as far as that population, and what's changed while you think that population has declined?
So there was and we can talk about this in a little bit more detail, but there was 6 years of, above average to phenomenal recruitment from the walleye fishery from the years 2013 into 2018. And by walleye recruitment, I just mean production of small walleyes. And what was likely driving that was the big flows that we had in the spring. Some research that we partnered with the University of Wisconsin, Stevens Point, to look at what factors are driving recruitment. Spring flows and winter severity seem to be significant driving factors. And so from the 2013 to 2018 timeframe, we saw really good recruitment in those 6 years. And that really fueled the fishery, over the last 5 to 10 years.
Okay.
So people really think, remember how good the fishery was. There were some big fish from some older year classes, but those 6 big year classes really kind of drove the numbers or what resulted in really big increases in numbers of walleyes. But then from 2019 to 2020, we had below average recruitment to complete year class failures in 2 of those 3 years. So we have essentially 3 missing year classes in the fishery, which would be those three of those younger year classes they would be from the 2021 to 2019 years. So those are your 4 to 6 year olds right now. They're largely absent from that fishery. So most of the fishery is driven by 7-year-old and older fish. We do have a couple of small or up and coming year classes of smaller fish. The 2022 and 2023 year classes were good year classes. And I am getting reports of more anglers catching fish in that 15, 16-inch range in recent trips. But all signs are pointing to a bigger year class this year. Lots of the perch anglers are telling me that they're catching lots of 7 and 8-inch walleyes out on the bay right now. We haven't done our fall young of the year recruitment surveys to look at how our catch rates this year compare to previous years. But it's looking like, anecdotally, some of the early reports, so we had a pretty good year class this year. So hopefully that'll bring a big year class of young fish into the fishery in a couple of years.
We were talking before off camera here, and I thought it was pretty interesting, but it does make a lot of sense that the years that we have late winters and we have more moisture, the better that our fishery is, right? The more productive it's been.
Yeah.
So it's interesting how the mild winters have been absolutely horrible for our walleye recruitment.
Correct.
Okay.
So, a couple of things. Walleyes typically have about 3 to 4 days of food reserves after they kind of hatch from their eggs while they're absorbing that yolk, and they need to have some food source available to them, which is zooplankton, right?
Okay.
Little itty bitty bugs in the water. Most people don't, see them, don't even know they exist. But they're an important food source for newly hatched fish. And earlier in the spring, those walleyes hatch. Typically, the greater the difference is between walleye hatching and when those plankton blooms occur. So they need to hatch later in the year to coincide with when those plankton
that makes sense. Yeah.
hatching. And also springtime flows, that brings a lot of nutrients in the water to fuel those plankton. It keeps the eggs clean and oxygenated while they're incubating, and it'll help carry those newly hatched larvae into the areas where there is plenty of plankton available for them to eat. So those are kind of the two driving factors that we really think are fueling the recruitment for walleyes out in the bay.
So let me ask you, is it possible when you have mild winters and we don't have a lot of moisture and these fish come up to spawn, is it possible that to get like help from clubs like Walleyes for Tomorrow to have them come in and strip some of these fish and maybe hold some of this fry in some of the ponds and try to give this fishery a boost when we do that? Because it seems like we are in, and again, this could change this winter. We could have a real winter in the next 10 years. It could be like that. But our pattern has been that we've had some very mild winters the last 4 or 5 years. So if that continues to go in that direction and we're not getting the good hatches, is that something that you guys would look at and be interested in partnering up with this? Because now I guess they're going to start a new Walleyes for Tomorrow chapter out of Green Bay, and I'm a huge Walleyes for Tomorrow person. They've done so much great things on the Winnebago system, and I know, Adam, you've worked with them on that. They revamped, you guys with their partnership, revamped all the marshes on the Wolf River, the main ones, and that's made an absolutely huge difference in our consistency as far as our hatches, right? I don't see on Winnebago the last 5 years, I don't see our cycles going up and down. It's been very consistent as far as young of the year fish. So
the potential to do some fry wagons. Walleyes for Tomorrow has done some fry wagons on lakes like Shawano Lake. I worked with Walleyes for Tomorrow.
It's really changed that. Well, it's amazing.
Just out there, but we still are seeing natural recruitment in the Green Bay system. The 2023 and the 2022 year classes were pretty good. And we typically don't allow fry wagons in systems that are still pulling off consistent natural reproduction. We let Mother Nature, do her thing. And typically, we do expect population swings to go up and down with strong and weak year classes. The other thing with the Green Bay system is it's such a big system, from a scale and scope standpoint. And you look at what they're doing on Shawano, they had a walleye wagon where they were raising 6 million fry, and that's a 6,000 acre lake compared to hundreds of thousands of acres for the bay. And they just doubled the size of their walleye wagon. I think they're up to trying to stock out 10 or 11 million fry on Shawano for a 6,000 acre lake. The amount of expense and time and effort that it would take to try and do that to contribute what Mother Nature could produce in a Green Bay system is difficult. The other challenge is if we spawn fish early, the walleyes are going to spawn when the walleyes spawn, right?
Right.
If we spawn them and raise them in a hatchery and we're still too early because there's no zooplankton,
they're going to die.
They're going to die anyway.
Right.
So that's not really, I don't think, going to get us around the mismatch between when the walleyes hatch and when the fry need that food source.
Is that something that they could dump into ponds?
And hold them there, maybe.
I don't know. I mean, trying to raise them in ponds, trying to feed them. Sometimes.
Once again, that's a lot of money, right?
Yeah, that's a lot. Of
Right.
money.
But I'll tell you, it is amazing when it comes to walleye fishing or any of the fisheries. It seems like the guys, that's when they really step up, the fishermen, right? I don't know why they don't go to the meetings more often, because I mean, you guys all experience that. Like when you guys have meetings, there's not a lot of people there. All right. When you start thinking about the amount of walleye fishermen that there is, you go to the boat landing on a Friday, Saturday, or Sunday, and there's hundreds, if not thousands of people out there fishing. But when you guys have a meeting and it's something really important, it just seems like people don't show up. Right. So, but when it comes to donating money, especially on a good cause like that, it seems like these clubs do very well as far as trying to find the resources to get things done, right?
Yeah, and I mean, they do. And I think one of the big reasons we're here too now, and one of the things Jason's been working on the last year or two, is really getting that outreach out there more. We had our winter spotlight series where we kind of spotlighted a lot of different talks throughout the state, our East District kind of area. But that included walleye and muskie. And we did bring in, 50, 60 people for those meetings. Which is a good start.
Yeah.
But I think in a lot of cases, you don't get the people in the seats until you have controversy. And at that point, you're just dealing with an issue, and you don't have a built up relationship where you can rely on that to really look at the issue and come at it from a, let's work on this together, let's solve it. So the earlier you can make those connections with people, the better you are at handling things that come up that are controversial and things like that. So
And there's definitely a lot of those, of controversial.
Well, let's bring one of them up. And I mean, this.
You want to start? I got a whole list of them.
Okay. Well, I just want to start with this one, and I know that not everybody can afford to have a boat, and there is just a tremendous amount of guys that, like, it's just amazing when I look at, the O'Connell, like going up to Stiles Dam or going to the Peshtigo River, the Menominee, the amount of people that go there, and they're fishing these fish basically right where they're spawning, right? So I personally think that, like, I don't want to take away from anybody not being able to go fishing, but I personally think that it would not be the worst idea to back up them borders and get them back a little bit farther, so the guys aren't right up there and messing with these fish when they're spawning, and obviously the eggs and everything up, stirring all that up too, right? I think it's, and again, I'm going to ask you guys this. I mean, rumors. The rumor is that I hear that 50% of the Creole census surveys, 50% of our population is taken out in the spring before the season opens. True or not true?
You mean 50% of the walleyes are harvested in the spring? Definitely not true.
Okay, I've heard that again, rumors. I've heard that rumor several times, and I look at it. Well, there's a lot of people, but there's not that many people.
Yeah, right.
They can only keep one fish.
Correct.
Okay.
So let's touch base on a couple of things that you brought up there. There are two 24-hour refuges on two of the four major spawning tributaries. So the Fox River has a 24-hour refuge from the power lines to the De Pere Dam.
Yep.
The Peshtigo River has a 24-hour refuge from the 100 yards downstream from the dam, I believe. There's no landmark. It's just
You're right.
distance. So the Oconto and Peshtigo both have night refuges. The O'Connell from the highway, I believe the 141 bridge to the Stiles Dam, all the way up to, or from the highway 141 bridge to the Stiles Dam. And then the Peshtigo River refuge expands down to the railroad bridge.
Right.
So, the majority, not all, but, a good portion of the walleye spawning actually takes place at night, when those refuges are in effect. So, that clears out those areas a lot of times at night when the walleyes are in there doing their spawning. So most of the time the anglers are staying right along shore, and there's big expanses out in the middle of the rivers where the walleyes will spawn the entire width of that river. So they're not actually, they might step on some of the eggs right on the margins, but there's lots of areas in the middle of those rivers, especially when we get some higher flows, when people can't really wade very far offshore. So there's plenty of protected areas. As far as the number of adults that are handled every year, we started our large reward tag study in the spring of 2024. That was, kind of a mirror of the long-term tagging that's been going on in the Winnebago system, but also including that reward tag component. And we're really thankful for partners like Walleyes for Tomorrow for getting, helping us pay for the rewards. That if anglers catch a reward tag walleye with one of the red tags, it says reward $100 right on it, and it's a valid tag. They have a valid until date printed on them, which is about a year from the time we tag them. Mm-hmm. If they report that to the DNR with proper verification, they don't have to harvest the fish. If they take pictures of the tag with the tag number, the close-up with the 3-digit tag number, and a picture of them holding it, they still get that $100. So we've been through 2 springs right now with our reward tag study, and in the spring of 2024, we tagged 4,535 walleyes in that spring time frame. And we try to tag our walleyes before the peak of the spawn so we get as much data on the spawn as possible. So tagged 4,535 walleyes. Anglers reported catching, not harvesting, catching 172.
Okay. Pretty small number.
Entire year, correct.
Yes.
10% would be 450, and they reported catching 172. Of those, only 109 were reported as being harvested. And when we count for things like tag loss, and angler non-reporting rate, those reward tags are really helping us understand that non-reporting rate. We estimate that the exploitation rate for the first full year of our tagging study was only about 4.8%. So certainly not harvesting 50% of the population.
Is that number that you're coming up with, is that on all the tributaries you're saying?
Yes, that's across the system.
Right. So can you run that number one more time, the harvest number on on all the tributaries in the spring?
Yeah. In the spring, no, that's not even in the spring. That's the entire year.
Okay.
I was looking for my piece of paper with the numbers broken down by the springtime.
And that would be 4,000 walleyes you tagged in spring for a full year to bounce back, and you reported 179 reported throughout the year.
Correct.
Throughout the year, not just spring.
Correct. That's not just the spring fishery. That was 172 were reported as being caught from the time we tagged those fish until March 31st, 2025. So we started tagging the first week of March in 2024, and we were looking at that first full year of exploitation. So from the time we tagged those fish, and we were done by April 10th or 11th, until March 31st, 2025, anglers reported catching 172 of the 4,535 and harvesting only 109.
So let me ask you, what do you think in the spring between, because De Pere is a different story because you can only keep one fish over 28. So in the spring between, let's just say Pinsaki is a small number, but let's just say Ocano, the Peshtigo, and the Menominee, how many fish do you think in the spring during that run are harvested and taken?
How many total? Or
total.
What percent of
total amount of fish that are taken?
So I don't have our creel data in front of us, but I know it was estimated that for the entire 2024 fishing season, anglers harvested about 75,000 walleyes. And according to our tagging study, about 40% of the walleyes that were harvested were reported as being harvested in the major rivers, and about 60% of them came from the bay.
Okay.
During the first full year of our tagging study, about 40% of the overall harvest from tag returns came during those spring fisheries. So we did see, based on our observations, we don't have our creel data yet this year, but this spring, there was quite a bit more activity on the rivers. I don't know if you saw the same thing, if you guys were up on the rivers.
I did not see that. I saw totally the opposite of that.
Okay.
I did totally the opposite.
That's not what our tag return.
I know and I don't fish De Pere, but when you're talking about the other tributaries, I saw the least amount of people that I've seen in, I've been doing it a long time. Right.
And how much did that have to do with, as fishermen, it was one of the worst springs fishing wise in spring?
Well, it was a tough spring. I didn't see the numbers either, but here's something that, a couple interesting things is that, like, I have to admit that, like, I've caught a fair amount of tag fish and I report none of them. Right. So that's, on my end, that's probably a bad thing, right? Because that's driving these numbers down. And I know most people that I know just don't report the yellow tags. If they were obviously $100 tag, I'm going to report it. But so that's just because, like, I mean, I'm used to this thing that's been going on since I've been a kid, the tagging, the yellow tags on the Winnebago system. And it's always the same thing. Like, so, and again, it's kind of like the thing that I would be interested in knowing, because I know there's a lot of people that are like me. And again, I'm guilty of it, and I'm not saying it's right at all, but I think it's just, you can call me lazy if you want. But I think that you just, it's hard to find time to, like, and I don't really care about, it's the data on that, which is, again, a bad thing. But it's just to find time to turn that tag in and to report it.
Especially when you're in the boat, right? Like, you're thinking about fishing.
Well, it's just like,
there's other stuff going on.
Things to do it. It's even like the Creel census thing that, as guides, that we're supposed to fill out. Like the other day, I was up there on Saturday last weekend, and like I got 1,000,001 things going on, and I did get a ticket for it the first year they had it because I forgot to do it. And so what happened is, like, on Tuesday when I'm fishing, I'm like, son of a buck, I forgot to fill that Creel census thing out. So I got on my phone, it came to me. So again, it's like, it's a fast-paced world. But I guess here's my whole thing, Jason and Adam, is that, like, what I would be like more, I think that what would be more correct data would be in the spring when you guys are doing, your tagging, is to see how many of them tags you guys get back yourselves. How many of these fish have been tagged multiple times, because that to me is a pretty good indication if, like, all of a sudden,
what's left?
Like whatever is left, whatever, if it's 40%, 60%, how many of that 60%, obviously you're not going to be able to get catch every one of these fish, but how many of them tags am I seeing? Right. That's, to me, that's a big thing, because again, I think that, like, in today's world, no matter what, people just don't take the time to be able to do it, right?
But you would for that reward.
I would for that reward. So that's got some substance to it.
Let's talk about the reward tags, and specifically what we saw for our reward tags. So in 2024, like I said, we tagged 4,535 total walleyes. 202 of those had the red reward tags. 4,333 had the yellow tags. So in that first year, those red reward tags were valid until March 31st, 2025. We had 11 of the 202 returns.
That's it.
Woo. 3 were reported as being harvested. 8 were reported as being released.
Okay.
So 3 of the 202 reward tags. Let's go look at 2025.
And I don't think too many people are going to not
turn in $100.
No.
Yeah.
So we were concerned that we didn't put enough reward tags out in 2024. We only got 11 back, and that really drives our non-reporting rate numbers, right? Because we assume 100% of those red tags are going to get reported. So that's how we get a much better understanding of how many of those yellow tags are not reported. So Walleyes for Tomorrow was awesome to allow us to double the number of red reward tags that we put out. So we put out 401 this spring, and we've got much higher numbers return this year. We've had higher overall tag returns. Still not terribly concerning. The only 48 of the 401 red tags have been reported, of which 24 have been reported as being harvested. The other 24 were reported as being released.
Right.
So overall, low numbers coming back from the red reward tags too. We're sitting a little over 5% of the red tags being harvested, reported as harvested, right? 24 out of 401 so far this year.
Right. So let me ask you guys, if you guys think that the population is still healthy on the Bay of Green Bay, as fishermen, why are we struggling so much? And my big thing was this, is that I'm up in the tributaries there for almost a month and a half. We rent a house up there, and we're out fishing pretty much every day. And there's a lot of nights that we're fishing in electronics nowadays. And I'm just going, I know it's a huge, huge system, and a lot of things when it comes to Mother Nature, they change all the time. And there's been a lot of different changes on the bay. I mean, the white perch are absolutely astronomical. The alewife come in and stay in a lot longer. They came back in this fall. First time I've ever seen that. The whitefish, are up in the Fox River thicker than thieves in the spring. Never saw that in the early days. So again, changes. So in your opinion, like this spring, when I'm like, well, I know a lot of things can happen, but I'm going to really spend a lot of time between Peshtigo and Ocano and really try to graph as many fish as I can. And I saw very few numbers, even at night when there was a lot less pressure out there. Because these fish, it is amazing how spooky these fish have adapted to the electronics, right? You get a couple bolts on these fish and you're live scoping or side imaging, they blow out of there, right? So in your opinion, why didn't I see these fish, right?
So I think there's a couple of things that could be contributing to that. We talked about recruitment at the beginning of the podcast here, and we're missing those 4, 5, and 6-year-olds fish. So, mortality rates aside, just the lack of new fish being introduced to the population for 3 years, you're going to see declines in that population. I think there's some other things that are going on. So, for example, on the Oconto River, I don't know what sections of the river you fish, but in the 2 years that we've done tagging studies, we have not tagged a walleye above Susie's Rapids. I don't know what sections of the river you're fishing. I don't know if
I fished the lower part. Yep, mostly the lower part.
I wasn't sure if you were going farther upstream, but we see, at least in the last 2 years when we've had lower numbers, it seems like a lot of fish are stopping at places like Susie's Rapids, which for those who don't know where that is, it's a really shallow section of really nice cobble just upstream from the Highway 41 bridge. Have you fished there?
Yeah.
Have you fished downstream of there?
Yep.
Yeah. So we actually catch a ton of walleyes, right up in that area that they don't even seem to be going all the way to the Stiles Dam in some years because there's plenty of really good spawning cobble and things downstream from that. So I think that's driving some of the dynamics. Unfortunately, we don't have population estimates in each of the spawning tributaries. That would be really difficult to be able to, get actual abundances of adults given how many fish are out there. The way that we really get abundances estimates is with mark recapture studies. And you had asked us earlier how many walleyes we see that are coming back with tag returns. And I'll be honest with you, we do see a few, but we don't see a lot. And what that tells me is that there's a lot of walleyes that are out there because they're not disappearing from anglers harvesting them, and worse than not recapturing the same fish over and over again. We're encountering lots of new fish. We also remove dorsal fin spines from a lot of our fish that we handle. So, they don't regrow their dorsal fin spines. We remove those for age estimates. And so that's another thing, we look at. Did we collect a dorsal fin spine from some of these fish that might give us an idea of tag loss? And we just aren't seeing. So there's lots of new fish that are handling. The other thing that we've also seen to a degree in some of the tributaries is with these bigger swings in spring temperatures, we get pulses of fish that move up and they spawn and they leave. Whereas think about like the 2018 spawn, it was so cold. We had that big blizzard in early April where we got 24 to 30 inches of snow. And I'm guessing that there wasn't much spawning that took place beforehand. But in our tagging studies, we've seen females releasing eggs as early as March 13th, March 14th on the Fox River sometimes. And they're still releasing eggs by mid-April. So
Yeah, that's a long span.
when you start to spread those spawns out, over that long of a time period, and you get these pulses of fish moving in and out of those rivers, that can break up some of that fishing.
For sure.
Over one big, really good spawn for a
Right.
2-week period over, more mediocre fishing over a 4, 5, 6-week time.
Makes a lot of
Yeah,
sense.
I would agree. Like last year, I would say the last 2 years, I fish De Pere a lot more than Larry does. And it's always like, okay, you go out there and maybe you have a not so great day and you're like, okay, next week it's going to warm up. That's the time. And you go out, not so great day again. You're like, okay, it's got to happen here. Eventually they're all going to come, right? And you're saying it's not always the case. Like it's so spread out. You can't just bank on the weather like, okay, they're going to be up here this weekend. That might not be the case. You might not get that giant push where your fishing's outstanding because you're getting all these new fish, and that's not always happening.
Yeah. No, it doesn't. I mean, when you get these pulses of fish that move into the river and spawn and leave, rather than having the majority of the spawning stock in the river at one time, you're getting these little segments, and you're fishing, 10, 25% of
Right.
the spawning
Yeah.
stock on these peaks versus, that 1 to 2 week period if you hit it just right, where 75, 80% of them are there for that time frame.
Right.
Yeah. If you're a hunter, that's the trickle rut analogy. It's harder to pin that down versus when you get that 1 week, some years, or 2 weeks where it's on and you can find them and they're moving. Kind of similar deal with we see some of these years with fish too, with kind of that more prolonged spawning period.
because of our weather patterns, for sure.
Right. And I would say the last how many years the weather has been not so, consistent, cold, late, warm, early, not a lot of ice for a whole bunch of years, like you said, not a lot of snow. Something I wanted to ask you guys, this is maybe transition a little bit. How much as far as, you have your data and you have tags and stuff, and obviously the return rate isn't as awesome as you'd like. How much in your guys' jobs in general do you take off of the anglers, like being at a landing or, talking to us or being out to eat somewhere and someone says, oh, the fishing's been really good or this or that. How much does that actually go into your data? Because I know sometimes it's like, no, this is the science. We got to stick to this versus what is
Good
being
question.
said out there.
So on the Bay, we have a creel program that is directly designed to be interactions with the anglers. We have 4 creel clerks during the open water season that cover from the Menominee River all the way around up to Door County.
Yeah.
And everywhere in between. So that is direct data coming from interviews
Yes.
of anglers on the water at the end of the fishing season. And we track that data for looking at the numbers of fish caught, the numbers of fish harvested, changes in effort. And we've seen in our creel program a pretty consistent, over the last 20 or so years, increase in the number or the amount of effort. 10, 15 years ago, it was somewhere estimate around 400,000 hours targeting walleyes on the Bay. So you look at 2021, 2022, which was kind of the peak of that effort, and we were pushing 800 to 900,000 hours, which you'd alluded to earlier, just the increase in the amount of effort that we've seen over those years. And so those are the kinds of trends that we look at to help guide what we should do next, and that was one of the big driving forces behind this reward tag study is we heard from the anglers and we saw it in that creel data and things that there is a lot of harvest going on, and is it getting too high? We do still listen to anglers and listen to some of the reports, but we also do use a lot of our own data because as much as anglers want to believe that hook and line is a fantastic way to sample fish populations, it's not that good.
How dare you say that?
There's a reason we use nets and electricity as our primary sampling
Right.
tools. As Larry had talked about, there's absolutely phenomenal amounts of forage in the Bay at times, from white perch, alewives. Fishing is virtually existent for walleyes on the bay during the month of June. I don't know if you spend any time out there on June.
Not quite a bit, right?
It's incredibly challenging, and we see it in our tag return data. We see it in our creel numbers. Harvest goes down, in our creel, in our tag returns, everything, and it's thought that that's when the spawning alewives are in there. And there's such an easy forage for walleyes.
It's hard to compete with that.
Right. Can't.
So much natural forage. And Adam has seen this on the Winnebago system by looking at comparing their catches of forage. Is it trout perch? It's a big
Because they're shad. Well, trout perch are the good base, but shad are the big one where you get those shad hatches.
really big forage hatches on a system like Bago. Their exploitation rates go way down.
Yeah.
We can get around some of those confounding factors by using electricity and nets and not relying on competing with all the natural forage and things. So we do listen to anglers. We take into account their concerns and thoughts, but we also use our data to help really guide that management.
So I guess, to take a big step back, and there's the uproar, like, oh, the population's down and fishing's been tough and yada, yada, yada. Looking at the data that you have, you're not jumping the gun to do anything extreme yet, because you're going off of, we had 3 non-existent years. Like, eventually it's going to come to a head where people are going to experience that. So you're going to okay, everyone relax a little bit. We had 3 years that no one can control, Mother Nature rules all. So in 3 years, it could bounce right back up, right? Versus doing anything dramatic to change laws or anything like that.
Yep, exactly. And that's what we are looking at it from a population level. We expect populations to go up and down. That's a natural process in all wild animals. Deer populations go up and down. Fish populations go up and down. And we saw it in our young of the year catch rates, largely 3 absent year classes. And we would expect numbers to go down from that.
Eventually it's going to,
But the flip side of that is a lot of anglers think that harvest and overfishing has caused the significant decline, in that by changing the regulations, we would have ultimately
fix those issues. Yeah.
sustained the walleye fishery the way it was from those boom years. And what our tagging data is showing recently is that anglers are only harvesting 5 to 10% of the population in a given year. And when you think about it, if they're only harvesting 5% given the current regulations, a reduced bag limit, to let's say a 3 from fishing opener through the end of the game fish season from the current 5 isn't going to save astronomical amounts of fish and really preserve large numbers of fish. It's hard to prevent a decline of some sort when you have 3 missing.
Yeah, 3 years, right.
And our data shows that the 2022, 2023 year classes were decent year classes. And so, there should be some younger fish coming into the fishery.
And so the missing year classes, what is the length of those fish that they would be at right now that anglers are missing out on?
Yeah, so walleyes grow really well in the Bay of Green Bay, and I think you guys are going to put some of these.
Yeah, we're going to put them all up so you guys can see this.
So the missing year classes were from 2019, 2020, and 2021. So those would be 4, 5, and 6-year-old fish. In a male walleye at 4 years old averages about 16 inches, and at 6 years old, they average about 19 inches.
Okay.
So that's your males. Your females at 4 inches averages about 19, or 4 years old, excuse me. And at 6 years old, they average about 21 inches. So you're missing those, basically the teens.
Yeah, and those are the fish that a lot of people like to keep on.
Yeah, I like to keep. I can tell you that much on that.
So with those 3 missing year classes, those are the quote eaters that everybody talks about, those 4s, 5s, and 6-year-olds.
Yeah, and that's what you're seeing, reflecting, being out there, we're catching these giant fish and these small fish. What happened to all the eaters?
Right. So let me ask you guys both this. What kind of changes are you guys just going to let this ride the way it is and let Mother Nature try to balance it back out? Or is there some things that you guys would like to do or like to change to try to help her out a little bit? Because if there's any woman that's extremely inconsistent, it's Mother Nature, right?
So correct. It's really hard to control what Mother Nature wants to do. So the whole reason we put in that reward tag study was to really get an understanding of all of the details regarding angler harvest, right? The whole regulation component, from what is the total exploitation rate for the year, the percent walleyes that are harvested, and if that's concerning, what times of the year is the most harvest occurring, to really focus those regulations. Because as a fish biologist, I've heard every recommended regulation.
Oh, I bet you have.
Oh, yeah.
And maybe a few came from me.
From closing the spring fishery to leaving it open to 28-inch min on all of the fish,
To go into a one pole line or one fish, one line.
to slot limits, but a 5-bag limit, to 3-bag limits, to 3 bags with slot limits. But we really need to know where that harvest is occurring to really know how and what regulations might be most effective at managing that fish. And we're not even through, 2 full years of that study. And you fish for many, many years. You know that populations go up and down.
Right.
Variation. And so when we reached out to Walleyes for Tomorrow, we agreed to do this study for a minimum of 3 years to really understand some of that year-to-year variability that we might see in what's driving harvest trends and things like that. So we did know that we've got a couple of good year classes that are coming up that should fuel the fishery moving forward. But that doesn't mean, just because we're not changing regulations, doesn't mean that we're not working on, trying to improve the overall health of the walleye fishery. And you mentioned there's a new Green Bay chapters of Walleyes.
There is, coming up.
I don't know if they consider themselves a Green Bay chapter, the Northeast chapter, what their exact title is. So it might not show up as Green Bay Walleyes for Tomorrow if you Googled, that organization. But there is a new chapter. There used to be an older chapter, but they hadn't been very active recently, so they just kind of restarted up that chapter again. And Tom Kraft is the president of that chapter, and they've really hit the ground running, in particular looking at projects. And we were out at the Fox River earlier this week looking at potential sites for them to install some new walleye spawning reefs on the Fox River.
I saw that on Facebook this week.
Yep. I think they posted some information up on their group. We're still in the preliminary phases, but we've identified some sites for potential spawning reefs to try and give walleyes more locations to spawn. The more places that they have good spawning habitat available, the
more options.
So more options to pull off some recruitment in some years. There's also the Green Bay and Lower Fox River area of concern. Have you guys heard of that?
No, I've not.
Oh, okay. So back in the 80s, Green Bay and the Lower Fox River was designated as an area of concern along with several other areas around the Great Lakes. It's an internationally recognized designation between the United States government and the Canadian government. And these were designated as areas of concern because of significant declines in environmental conditions and corresponding declines in fish and wildlife populations. So in this particular area of concern, they were PCB contaminants was a big driver.
Paper mills.
Designation. Declines in water quality, just overall from nutrient loading, harmful algal blooms, things like that, as well as loss of fish and wildlife habitat. And so they did do some work in the 80s and early 90s as part of those restoration efforts outside of the area of concern. But right now in the area of concern, there's 12 designated habitat areas that we're working on fish and wildlife habitat projects. And each one of those fish and wildlife habitat projects has species that are assigned to be the focal species for those habitat projects. So some have muskies as the focal species. Some have bass and panfish as the focal species. But there's 2 projects that have walleyes as a focal species. One, and they're both on the bay. One is the Joliet Park. They're going to work to do some new cobble placements in and around the historical reef that was put there by Walleyes for Tomorrow.
Mhm.
And then another one of the habitat projects, they were going to try to put some offshore reefs out in the middle of Dead Horse Bay. But after we looked into that area, it's too soft sediments. The rocks would just settle in the muck and likely get covered. So we're working to identify some new areas to place some offshore reefs, likely more offshore in the University Bay area, because that side of the bay has much harder substrates.
Okay.
Again, giving the walleyes more options to spawn, and those projects should get constructed within the next year or 2. There's also a large project targeting sturgeon spawning below the De Pere Dam.
Okay.
We've worked for years with research partners at the University of Wisconsin Stevens Point to really get an understanding of where species like walleyes and whitefish were spawning below that dam and identify areas outside of the prime spawning areas for those species where we could create a 1-acre cobble shoal primarily targeting lake sturgeon spawning, but lake sturgeon spawn in very similar habitats to
The walleyes.
whitefish do. So we're going to look at putting that reef in the next couple of years to enhance the overall cobble spawning habitat below the dam. So we are working on continuing to do some habitat restoration projects, and I'm really excited to work with the new Walleyes for Tomorrow chapter because those guys hit the ground running and are super passionate, to work on, these other projects to try and help ensure the sustainability for that walleye fishery, So, but we do expect, populations to go up and down. It's hard in any population to have to continue to sustain 6+ years of above average recruitment, including the 2 largest year classes on record, which is what we had from that 2013 to 2018 time frame.
Almost like an inflated ego of what the fishing actually is.
Right.
Yeah, there were some really big expectations of what the fishery could be, from what came from those 6 years, but likely not going to be able to maintain it. I mean, that's just such a hard thing to do.
Yeah, those numbers are insane.
One thing that really, when it comes to walleye fishing, that really interests me, and I don't go down there as much as I used to just because I love fishing at home here a little bit more, but like when you start thinking about a walleye fishery, number one walleye fishery in the whole world, and there's nothing that even compares to this. And I know that in the early days, there was certain people that would say it was a miniature Lake Erie, the Bay of Green Bay. But when you look at and you think about, like, if I want to gain serious knowledge about walleye spawning in walleye populations, is that, like, when you look at what they have down there, what cosmetics makes Lake Erie such a tremendous, obviously it's a huge system, but what makes that thing, they have such great consistent hatches. And I hear, when I go down there, I've fished it many times, like they have great spawning in the rivers, but they have absolutely awesome spawning on the reefs themselves. So I think to myself, like, what drives that system? Why the lake spawning fish? And here, when you get low years and you don't have that flow, that lake spawning walleye seem to hold that population up. And when you have high years, they both are pretty good. So when you think about, like, again, the knowledge that when trying to gain knowledge of a system, you would look at the number one system in the whole country, right? Or in the whole world, basically. There's nothing even in Canada that even comes close to Lake Erie, even though, Lake Erie is part of Canada as Lake Erie. But when you think about, like, some of the big lakes, Winnipeg and all that fisheries, they've got great numbers of walleyes, but there's nothing that compares to that system. So, by you guys talking about putting more reefs out on the lake out there, that would really be interesting to know what the data is from the Ohio guys down there as far as what kind of population do they think comes off the lake versus the river, right?
So my understanding is that they think the majority of the walleyes are produced on the reefs,
That's interesting.
Okay.
Very
Yeah.
interesting.
to the rivers. And I'm not the biologist, but
Right.
think and I've read, they've done some papers and some research, and they look at things like direction of the wind in their springtime during the spawn and how that can.
That's got to be huge, I bet. Yeah.
And currents in transporting the newly hatched fry to where the zooplankton are on the.
Makes sense. Yeah.
But we don't have the same, at least I'm not aware of the same, reef spawning habitat on the bay. It's thought that Larson's Reef used to have some walleye spawning on it, but we don't have the same reef structures, which is part of the reason we're looking at adding some more reef habitat in areas that are going to get some of that higher energy offshore. There's lots of spawning cobble in the nearshore areas, but again, when you look at things like changing water levels and seiches and
Right.
stuff like that, those offshore reefs are a little bit more
Consistent.
consistent from, they're going to be underwater at all times during seiche.
Right.
Some of those walleyes that are spawning in less than a foot of water, at a high seiche, a point where the seiche is high on the bay, those eggs might get dewatered, when that seiche pushes farther offshore, whereas you don't have those
Yeah. That makes sense.
fluctuations on more of that reef habitat.
Right. Well, and I just think to myself, if again, going back to the number one walleye fishery, like when you think about something and you're a biologist and you think about like, what can I do to change to make this a better fishery? And so you look back at, well, I'm just going to look at the best walleye fishery in the whole country and really try to understand why is this so good, and maybe take bits and pieces of that and bring it into our system, right? And see, because it's certainly, by putting more rock out there, it certainly isn't going to hurt anything, right? There's nothing negative about putting more structure out there for these
Except
fish
my
to
prop.
Except your prop.
Yeah. Well, Adam, I want to ask you too, because when you think about the Winnebago system, it's the Wolf River. They spawn in there. It's like what everyone thinks about. But how much spawning actually happens out on the lake?
There's been some work done when I was there, and Angelo has kind of continued some of the movement work and looking at in-lake spawning versus rivers, and it is pretty dominant on the rivers. That's where the majority of spawning happens, but that's not to say that there isn't some spawning happening on, Lake Winnebago, South Shore Poygan, where you got some riprap, maybe some of those points on Butamore. There's some. It just seems
Small numbers.
small numbers,
Yeah. So one thing I did want to bring up to you, Jason, is that you're trying to, you said before, I wanted to kind of go back to this subject, is that you're trying to determine, when the majority of the walleyes were taken as far as, caught on the Green Bay system. Well, I think on the Green Bay system, it's probably a little bit easier to know where that time frame is on Green Bay when the majority of the walleyes are caught, because let's just take Winnebago. Astronomical amount of people fish it all winter long. Like, it gets fished hard and it's accessible most winters, right? Where the Bay of Green Bay is really not accessible. And for some reason, very few people that I know of consistently catch walleyes in the winter on the Bay of Green Bay. So at that time frame, I would just say in general, not being a biologist or watching creel census, is that very few walleyes come off the Bay of Green Bay. So then that takes out the whole equation of the winter. And then you go into spring, and the great part about, the Green Bay system is that it is a closed system. One fish, it to pier in the Fox River there, it's got to be over 28 inches. Rest of the tributaries, it's one fish over 15 inches. And you think about the one fish, how many people actually are taking walleyes out. So that's not a high number. So I would say the majority, and I'm just my input on this whole thing, the majority of them fish. And then you go back to what you're saying before, come, opener, it's not too bad, May. And then when it starts coming to June, end of May into June, the alewife move in and it just shuts everything down for the most part. And so it's basically not until, July, late July, August, September, and them 3 months is when I would say myself, the majority of the walleyes are caught on the Bay of Green Bay, because then what happens is in September, again, you get big movements of shad, you get big movements now alewife, you got all sorts of other food. But the other thing that happens is the wind switches. The wind switches more out of the north. You start getting these pulls of cold water coming in, and the fish like disappear for the most part. And, you know, a lot of them do migrate back into the Fox River, right? And you don't see like groves of people up in the Fox River in the fall. Some people, but it's not crazy amounts of fish that come out then. So it's basically them 3 months that the majority of the walleyes are caught on the Bay of Green Bay, right?
So yeah, you hit on a lot of really good points. For that first tagging season, we had one winter, we had 172 tag returns. 2 came from ice anglers.
Oh, that's crazy.
These other 170 came from anglers fishing out in the open water. So these last couple of years, the spring fishery has been a big component of the fishery. So we have 172 total tag returns. 81 of those, are just about 50%, just under 50%, came in the 4 major rivers, predominantly in the spring, and 92 came from the bay. 109, that was the harvest. 109 of the 172 walleyes were reported as harvested. So 40 of them were harvested in the rivers and 69 out in the bay itself. So about 35% harvest of that first year. So far this year, we're not done with our second full year of the study. There's going to be some tag returns trickling in. We did have a much bigger pulse of tag returns coming from the spring fishery this year. We've had 239 tag returns come in from this year. 141 came from the rivers. 98 have come from the bay so far. So we're a little bit more skewed towards that spring fishery. About 60% of our tag returns so far came from those river fisheries. We've had 121 fish reported as harvested, 63 in the rivers, 58 in the bay. So we're right at that 50%. I think part of that has to do with angler perceptions and angler dynamics. You know, we don't have a lot of those young eater-sized fish out there, and the population is down, likely down from the peak of that fishery. And so you get the people that come and do a lot of that spring fishing, especially to catch, those adults. When they congregate in large numbers, it's not as easy to catch those 7, 8, 9, 10-year-olds out in the bay. And so it's easier to catch them when they're congregated in big numbers. It will be really interesting to see when we run the tagging study here, if we get a couple of these bigger, younger year classes, if that dynamic shifts back to a lot more harvests during that summer time frame when the bag limit's 5 versus when the bag limit's 1. So that's one of the reasons we really want to keep that tagging study going, to really see as the population changes, once we get some of those bigger year classes of younger fish, do these harvest trends change? And to what degree do they change? How do they change?
No, and I mean, just to put it in a little perspective, because we've thrown a lot of numbers out, obviously, but, typically for walleye fisheries, we want to manage them at or below 20 to 30% exploitation. When you start getting up into that 20% plus, depending on the system, whether it's productive or not, that's when you start to see more of a caution flag. Like, do we have the right rig? Should we start to look at different rigs to reduce that exploitation? So, the first 2 years of the study that Jason's been leading, we're seeing 5 to 10%. So it's not showing us like that red flag or that caution flag of like, we got to attack this regulation side right now. Doesn't mean it's off the table, but it's something that with more years of data, we're able to kind of complete that story and say, this is what we could do, based on what we found regulation-wise that would have the biggest impact on reducing exploitation. So we're just, for a little comparison, when we first did the reward tag study on Winnebago, it was kind of, that first year was a little bit like Christmas. Every morning we come in, there'd be a red tag in the mailbox. So we were seeing, exploitation over 30% on adult females. And that was more of that like caution flag, like we should probably look at this and talk about this more. So we're in a little different situation, I think, with the Bay. But, I think we're in a good position to understand it and hopefully be proactive as needed.
Now, have you seen that exploitation go down since 5 to 3?
That's more in Angela's territory. It has been down a little bit. Exploitation was a little bit higher this past year. The one thing is it's still very recent. It's hard to compare, 4 or 5 years of data to 20 years of data before at the 5 Bay. And we also have not had the shad hatch. And that is makes a huge impact on exploitation.
Right.
So I think I think that's still yet to come to evaluate that and continue to kind of see how that
Now,
goes.
would there be any chance that bag would go back up to 5 again?
No, I'm just saying that right now, there is not, over my dead body, is that ever going to go back to 5. And I'm just going to throw this in here. So, I'm just going to tell you guys this. I've been guiding for a long time now. And, it typically what would happen on the Winnebago system is come July, late July, the forage levels would blow up. Fishing got extremely tough. I would be fishing somewhere else. Big Green, Petenwell, Castle Rock. No, the last 5 years, especially the last 3 years, our fishing has been so good out on that bay, out on Winnebago, the whole summer, all the way into fall, all the way into October. It's incredible. So we have great numbers of bait fish, but we do not have that shad population like we had in the earlier days where that would shut it down. Our fish are really healthy out there. And I just have to laugh when that 3 fish bag limit went into effect. There was so many hate mails. People were wound up crazy about it. I'm not going to ever fish Winnebago again. So worst thing, the economy's going to fall apart. All this gloom and doom stuff. It's still the same amount of people out there that there always has been. Think about that everybody out there, if you're following the regs, that's 2 less walleyes. That it's only common sense. It's only 2 less walleyes per person that are being taken off of that system. How could that ever hurt that body of water, right? I've been saying this forever. Fishing is more about just harvesting fish. Fishing is about going out and retaining the knowledge of catching these fish, how to catch them, where they're at, and having the fun and the experiences about that. And so, to me, having a healthier fishery always is a better way to get more people, especially younger people, involved in the outdoors, because everything's got to be instant to them nowadays. I'm just the way it is, right? But so I feel my whole thing is that the better we can keep a fishery, the more younger generation we can keep fishing. That's all I care about. I don't care about, about the guiding thing. Some of my best trips have been with clients has been on the toughest fishing conditions there is and catching very few fish. That's really what, it really turns you into a good guide when you can make it enjoyable for these people when the fishing is tough. But again, going back to all these different changes is that, sometimes nobody likes changes. And so I guess I'm going to kind of head this down the other trail is that I'm just going to go over this one more time. In the next 2 years, are we going to see a decrease in the bag limit on the Bay of Green Bay in the next 2 years? Not. Okay, there you go. Let's get this out. Are we going to see any of the changes in the tributaries as far as the amount of space that the shore fishermen get to fish?
No.
There you go. Number 2. Right. Okay. Right. Perfect on that. Hunter, any other ones?
Well, the last thing I would like to ask, and this is kind of more of a point, just because everyone can see it. It's more of a reaction thing. Gets people, hot-blooded, wound up. People snagging fish in these refuge areas, close to the refuge areas. Now, illegal no matter what. It's not like you can change the laws on that, but everybody knows, the amount of officers, wardens are down to monitor this stuff.
Yeah, there's not enough wardens to be able to cover all that territory.
For you guys, your opinion on how that could get changed, what things can be done to help that?
I think, calling people in. I think a lot of times people see stuff and they don't want to be that person, which I understand. But like you said, we wardens cannot cover full area. So we rely on anglers and other members of the public, if they see something wrong, to report it. And if conservation wardens aren't getting those reports, then there's not a problem highlighted. The more reports you get, the more documentation, they can react to that and approach it better from a staffing standpoint and enforcement standpoint. So people got to call the tip line when they see things happening and be part of the system, be part of the fixing the system and protecting it. And, one of the things, like on Green Bay, at Winnebago, a lot of systems, but particularly those two systems, you have a lot of different user groups. You have shore fishermen, you have boat fishermen, you have boat fishermen that fish the rivers, boat fishermen that fish the bay. And, you have to really be able to understand the data, the population, and the regulations to make an impact there and say, we're going to restrict particular user groups more because we need to help maintain the fishery. So, there's got to be a lot of outreach as part of this, and that's what we're doing now. We're getting the data, we're doing the outreach, because you don't want to necessarily just come out and say, yeah, we're doing this, and that's it. You want to get people involved in the process, and I think that's where we're at right now.
So I think you're kind of answered a question I was going to ask you, and I'm still going to ask it. As outdoor people, as fishermen, what can we do to make your jobs a little bit easier?
Well, one of the things is if you're concerned about and see illegal activities, call them in. The adage holds with the wardens. We talk to them all the time. The squeaky wheel gets the grease. When they're getting calls about, saw these people here for the 5th time today, or, they've been casting into the refuge, the more calls that they get, the more they're going to react when they hear about, continual violations in certain areas. The other thing that they can do to help us out is do things like report tags.
Yeah, Larry. Come on, Larry.
Right? Yeah. Guilty. Yep.
Answer creel surveys honestly.
On time.
Guilty. Right?
So that we're making our decisions on the best data possible.
Right.
And the other thing is to ask questions. See what we're seeing from a fisheries management standpoint. If they have concerns, hopefully you guys can flash my business card or
for sure. We'll drop it here.
And things like that. So if you have questions, reach out, and I'll use a mini case study from what we're seeing with our tagging study to talk about fishing. So, in overall, how this fishing, and angler experiences play a role in harvest. So it's thought, based on some telemetry data that the University of Wisconsin Stevens Point did, that the Fox River has the largest of the spawning stocks of the 4 tributaries. It's the largest of the rivers, right? So the way that we split up our proportions of walleye tags was based on the estimated size of the run. So we put more tagging effort into the Fox River and the Menominee River system compared to the Oconto, Peshtigo, and Sturgeon Bay area. We tagged about 3 times as many walleyes each spring in the Fox and the Menominee River. So we put out 1,500 tags in the spring of 2024. 42 of those got reported and 11 got harvested. Anglers are not catching Fox River spawning stock during the summer fishery. They're largely absent from that summer fishery. Our estimated exploitation rate.
That's interesting.
Fox River
is very interesting. Where do they go?
1.4%. And that's just it. If those anglers can figure out where those fish are and how to catch them, there's a whole spawning stock of walleyes.
That's very interesting.
Absent from the summer fishery. So anglers are talking about difficult conditions and no walleyes.
That's a huge batch of fish that are not existent.
The fact that Fox River walleyes are completely missing from the tag returns, and this is the 2nd year in a row that that's happened.
Wow.
There's a whole spawning stock of fish out there, and we actually reached out to Stevens Point. They're going to submit some proposals to try and get some grants to do a really big telemetry study against
Tagging them, huh?
tagging
Some
adults.
Yeah.
right track.
Really see the differences in movements of adults from the spawning stocks and how those differences in movements align with our creel data and where anglers are fishing to help get a better understanding. Because I don't have a good answer. I have a suspicion as to where those walleyes are. I don't have a good answer for you. My gut feeling is they don't leave Lower Green Bay. We've done some random electrofishing surveys in August along places like the Cat Islands, which is the newly created island complex just on the west side of the shipping channel. And we'd go out there in July in the middle of the day and roll piles of 20 to 25 inch walleyes without an angler in sight.
I'm going to bleep that part.
Yeah, where nobody's gonna know that, right? Right.
So, but those are the kinds of things that we see with the tagging studies that kind of helps us, to a degree, separate population studies and stuff from angler experiences as angler reports, right?
Yeah. Well, that's interesting too, because I would say, like, you know, I fish, you know, that Ganos area like a tremendous amount, right? And, you know, I would just think that them Fox River fish would head that way. So I would say that them fish are either staying down in that lower part, like you said, Dead Horse University, which is, I know guys that fish that area a lot and they still don't catch them, or they head down that east shore and they go out that way and head out that way. They just don't migrate to the west shore as much. So that's an interesting thing. And again, that's kind of exciting because it's kind of like puts a new challenge on, like, that's the great part about fishing is I want to find them. I always said this, like, I've tried out there in the winter, you know, but we're so busy on Winnebago all the time. But if I was strictly a Green Bay guide or a Green Bay fisherman, I would have my snowmobile all over that bay in the winter, because you think about the number of walleyes that are out there, and like if you landed on them fish, what fun you could have catching them fish. And it just never happens, right? And just because nobody's out there doing it. So it is amazing when you start thinking about things and you start thinking, well, Adam, you're a huge a deer hunter and you like to hunt public land, and I've seen some of the deer you shot. So you think about that, like, you know, like, how did that deer ever get that big on public land, right? That's an interesting thing, and it's no different than walleyes. You think about, like, there's all these thousands of walleyes, 100,000 walleyes, 200,000, and nobody's catching them. Like, how can that even possibly be? But again, Mother Nature's got a way of protecting herself, but that if fishermen always claim to be so good, and the technology that we have now, you think it'd be simple to find them fish. But
That's amazing.
that's
cool.
actually
exciting.
pretty exciting. I got one more thing that I would like to bring up when you guys were talking about the tributaries like the Oconto and the Peshtigo and the Menominee. I personally feel, because I know that there's not enough wardens and people don't like to get involved with things anymore, right? This is one suggestion I would have, and maybe we could talk to the guys from Walleyes for tomorrow to donate some money, is that I would like to see cameras there. It'd be simple to hook them up, and somebody could be monitoring all them cameras. So if guys are coming back, guys are snagging, guys are up in the refuge, casting in the refuge, what a simple way to be able to monitor all that territory with one person, right? So,
yeah, and that would have to be a conversation with law enforcement, because they would have to be the ones that would monitor that. I don't know.
It would make their job a lot easier, right?
About, or, you know, how comfortable they would be with using cameras to write tickets or things. That would have to be a discussion. But I do know that they use plainclothes anglers every year since I've been here. I've heard that they use, and they never tell us when they're doing it or
right,
who they are or anything like that, but we hear about it after the fact. So they do certain things like that, you know, to try and help catch those people, right?
Right.
You see a warden standing on the bank, and your behavior is going to improve really quickly.
Right. If you have a camera there too, that might do the same. But even all that besides, that's not the major issue of why we're not catching a lot of fish. That's not it, right? It's not the, it's
not the guides.
I kind of always think about this, and Adam, you'll be able to relate to this. I always kind of think about the days when the walleye fishing on Winnebago, and again, cycles go up, cycles go down, when the fishing's really tough. it would be the river guys would be saying it's all the tournaments on the lake, they destroyed all the fishery. And then all the lake guys would be saying it's all the rafts, the guys on the raft destroyed all the fishery. And it wasn't either of them, right? It's just cycles. Mother Nature goes up, she goes down, and it's just the way it's going to be, right? You know, I'm going to lay one more thing in there. I want to know one guy that's married that sees his wife happy every day. That's what I want to say. And that's kind of the way fishing is. Some days you're happy, some days you're not, right?
No, this was super interesting. And obviously we'd like to thank you guys for
big time.
Yeah. It's been really fun, really interesting. I hope all you guys out there watching and listening maybe have learned something today. I learned
a ton. You know, the problem is that, you know, sometimes, you know, when you're out there all the time, you think you know it all, right? And then you get these guys to come in here and you do a podcast and you get to look at the data, which I should have just done the research on my own, and you start to get, you know, mixing opinions and expertise with what I know and what they know. And I'm like, I don't know that much.
Yeah.
Right?
Absolutely. So if you guys enjoyed the podcast, or there's any positives or negatives or any comments, you want to hear them all. So make sure you guys definitely comment down below, and we'd love to hear them all. And if there's a hotline or some place to email you guys, if they want to ask you anything, is there a certain
put that on there? Yep.
Yeah, well, you can flash my business card. It's got my cell phone and my email address.
Okay.
That's so if you look at the DNR staff directory online, that has my desk line. It's easier to get a hold of me on my cell phone.
Okay.
Call the number that you guys flash on the business card.
Yeah.
Don't look it up online. I'll still get back to them, but when I'm out in the out of the field or out of the office in the field, whether you know I'm doing walleye surveys or whatever, I keep my cell phone on me, so you got a better chance of getting a hold of me on my cell phone than my desk line.
Okay, absolutely perfect. Hey, everybody, thanks for joining us this week on We Eat Fish Eat. Like we do each and every week, we always want to thank all of our military men and women for the great service they've given this country and continue to give this country, along with all of our firefighters, paramedics, and no doubt all of our law enforcement agents. It is a great day to be alive. We'll see you guys and gals next week, and thanks for joining us.